we have everybody that we're waiting on?
Yep.
All righty. Okay. So as Josh said, a couple things. We'll dive in, setting the stage here. Just talk a little bit about our experiences and who we are, kind of what connects us to the space. As you said, it is a complicated audience, and there's tried to connect a few things that we've done to the kind of results that we're seeing. We'll walk through the opportunity, and I think we're all kind of facing this as a collective group of marketers. Generally, there's an opportunity that exists in the space that also creates a challenge, right? And then it's a matter of like, how are we solving it? So I want this, like, the idea here is to be, of course, there's, conceptual understanding of the problem, but we've tried to take it a little bit further and say, okay, this is how we're solving it for other people. And I don't know that it's everything that would be right for you, but it is something that we're seeing being a common solution. And a way to kind of tactically get there. And so hopefully this is just, some direction, or at least like some value that you can take from this as we're starting to see this in the market. So a couple of things. We've worked with, hundreds of clients at this point, but I think these are probably some relevant ones that are important here. Like, starting with who we work with them, and we've worked with them for several years at this point. I've actually been a part of that partnership for, since 2015. So mostly my entire life at LeadMD at this point. And we've helped them from everything from standing up technology all the way through helping them reorchestrate their entire internal marketing architecture, as well as revamping a lot of their analytics, go-to-market strategy, all of their kind of like experience design stuff. And so we're actually in the process of implementing good chunks of the solution that are represented in this deck for. We've been working with them for years. And so we're seeing a lot of what we're talking about here in action, in actually use cases that are largely working. I was mentioning this at the beginning. We have worked with, as well as, and you're right, they are on the chip manufacturing side, they're on the actual end user side, and it is a little bit more of a difficult thing, because we're talking about engineers and getting into design cycles and thinking about how we get those through. I do have some context with stepfather actually works for in the sales department. He sells analytical equipment. He's much smarter than me when it comes to lab equipment and all of that kind of stuff. I couldn't tell you much more than that, unfortunately, but largely, like, do have some context of like what it takes to largely get large equipment sold. And I know that there's a lot of people, and it's a complex sale, big buying committees. And so it's really important that we give people the type of experience that they largely need going into this. So this is just some context of like who is an organization, how we've worked with different people that, of course, I could go on in terms of a lot of people in terms of who we've worked with here, but I think these are probably some relevant examples to what we're diving into today. So what is the opportunity, and largely like kind of what is the challenge or the problem that we're largely facing? And I think, again, like, this is something that's not new, and this is not something that is faced by one particular group. I think all of us as marketers generally are facing this challenge, right? And it really boils down to, the way I look at it is, you have empower buyers like in a way that they've never been empowered before. You have people that have an immense amount of information at their fingertips, and they can do almost all the research that they would need to do sans any help, right? Like, they don't necessarily have to talk to a salesperson. They don't necessarily have to talk to marketing. They don't have to, a lot of the information that they would want to understand about products and the things that they buy and all of that's available to them. And so they can largely dictate their own buying experience. Some people like to have lots of conversation, and I realize at some point or another, they're going to have the right conversations to help them design the solution. But on the front end of that, on the marketing side of that, have this immense amount of information has created access, and you create this ability for people to go and find information, and make decisions without ever talking to anybody. And then they're coming into these conversations with sales and people that are a part of these structures, like, very, very well informed, and largely are well informed, educated people anyway. But it gives them the opportunity to find information without being able not anybody to be able to shape that experience. And I think that's the challenge that we all face, right? As we go into this new world where people are working from home and people can buy anything that they really want online. They can find any amount of information largely on Google and other sources. Like, how are we helping to shape their thoughts around any given product or experience if we're not ever talking to them? And I think this is the fundamental challenge that we all face. And so it's a matter of like, how do we fix that? Or what do we do, right? And so I think, using Amazon as an example, and I think largely know how Amazon has been so successful, of course, and I think looking at this, and I was looking through the market trying to decide like how do I think about this, and I think largely when we think about B2B versus B2C, we think about these two like separate models and different business structure, and I think yes, the buying process is different, and the ability to create multiple buying groups within a particular organization does differ between the two things. But in the end, like we're still talking to people, and we still have humans that are both consumers and B2B buyers. They're sitting in the same seat, right? And I think about my life, like if I bought technology, I would still want a similar experience that I get when I go do research for, I'm in the process of thinking about buying a lift for my truck, for instance. I got a new truck recently, and I'm thinking about buying accessories for my truck. I'm doing tons and tons of research. I've watched a bunch of YouTube videos. Reading a bunch of forums, going on these websites, never talked to one person. I'm almost at a point where I'm ready to buy something, never talked to a single person. And I also sit in a seat where I've been engaged or paid by big companies to do technology evaluations. And I largely can sit through, build out a set of requirements, tier all these companies based on their capability or maturation of them in a given space based on what the valuation looks like. And I can dig through their product documentation, and I can largely get to answers to almost every single requirement without ever talking to a single person at that technology company. And that is the type of experience that I want to be able to have. Because largely, like, I'm not sure that I really want to talk to salespeople. For one, I'm not sure that they're like, I've found and not knock on Josh, I have found that salespeople, especially in technology, as we evaluate some of these things, may not necessarily have all the right answers. And sometimes they're misinformed about their own product as you start digging through the product docs and understanding like, that's not exactly how it works, buddy. And having been in consulting and helping stand up technology for a really long time, I can speak firsthand to some of that. So I want the ability to do all my own research and answer all my own questions before going into all of this. And so when you think about what Amazon did, and this is something that Bezos has brought forward here, is like largely like what has made them so successful is this idea of customer obsession. And I think, obviously customer experience and 360 and all the things that are buzzwords in the industry, the concept that he's talking about here is customer obsession, truly, truly, truly putting the customer experience and the customer desire first, and thinking beyond just what makes them happy now, thinking about what makes them happy tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and bringing things to them from an experience that largely allows them to satisfy the things that they don't realize they're going to want once they get the first thing checked on the list. When I do research about this thing, the next thing I'm going to want is that thing. And how do I make sure that that's part of the experience that I'm having and allowing that to be surfaced up in a way that, one, isn't creepy, because there's some creepiness can go in, as you start retargeting people in certain ways. Two, like, how do you do this in a way that creates the type of environment where I can be self-directed, right? I'm directing my own buying experience, and I don't want to be hindered, but I want to be helped, but I don't want to be like big brothered, right? And that's largely what we're trying to solve here. So the next part of this is like, what is the challenges that exist in making that real? And there's lots of them, but here's number one. Customer science, right? And obviously we know the words data science, we know the words like customer analytics and all the things that go along with this, but like, can't tell you how many times I've seen customer research and market research that's really deep, but lacks a data side, right? Or lacks a data model. And the idea of like, hey, these are great personas. We did all this interviews and research and all this, and here's what the personas are telling us. Here's the messaging, blah, blah, blah. And my first question is, great. How do I identify that person in my systems? And they're like, I don't know. Tell me how that works. That's the first thing that Amazon solved for themselves, right? They largely solved it for themselves, and they turned around and sold it to the rest of us called Amazon Web Services. It's basically like the ability to understand your customer at a data level, getting every piece of information that you can, everything that you can gather around that person, you're collecting it, you're understanding it, you're building it, you're looking at it, and you're using it. That's the first step. You have to understand your customers and really at a level where you can understand somebody within your systems, within the things that you're working on, and build profiles and audiences based on data points, both profile-based data points, like who is somebody, name, and what would be like either firmographic information or demographic information, but also behavioral. How do we understand what people are doing on all of our different properties that exist digitally, right? And there's lots of them. Some companies have 20 sites, some of them have, 2 or 1. It depends on the structure there, but like Edwards Life Sciences, for instance, has 13 different sites that people can use. And I'm like, are you kidding me? How am I supposed to know? That's one of the problems that we have to solve. We have to get to, how do I understand the ecosystem and all of the behavior that's happening across that ecosystem down to a person level? So that's the first challenge that we ultimately have. The second challenge is a technology challenge, of course, right? So this is where technology is our best friend and our biggest Achilles heel in some cases, right? So most big organizations, and I think this is just kind of a little bit of a generalization, but most big organizations have a structure that largely kind of looks like this. You have the data layer, which is largely this big aggregate place where you're storing data. And this is either in a lake or a series of databases, and there's usually some disjointed places where data is being stored, at least in my experiences. And you've got a lot of data in a lot of different places, but that's your underlying storage. You have an analytics layer, which is about trying to make sense of that data in a way that allows you to visualize it, report on it, create some business intelligence, make some decisions. They usually have an experience layer. And the experience layer is more of what you consider like traditional marketing tools. So this is your ESPs, this is your ad management, social management, like, web personalization, chat messaging, all the things that people do. Anything that would be considered something that is interacting with a customer or client directly is an experience layer tool. The big gap that we're largely seeing, which is getting filled here by certain pieces of technology, is the orchestration layer. And this is the ability to understand, okay, I have all this data. In order to use it, I got to get it in one place. And as big companies talking to an IT person saying, can I bring all this data together? They're largely laughing at you because there's 13 different databases and they all have different unique identifiers. And they're like, good luck with that. Or there's multi-year MDM projects out there. Companies that are taking 3 and 4 years to re-architect their entire infrastructure so all of their data can live in an accessible way. Those are big, long projects. They are happening. It's actually happening at Edwards too. But it's just something that takes a lot of time and effort. And obviously, as a marketer, the difference between 2 years and 4 years, that's a huge amount of change to take place there. And so we don't really have the luxury of kind of waiting that long. So we've got to figure out how we're going to fill that gap, into this very quickly. So these are kind of the two biggest categorical challenges that I see. And so impact benchmarks. These are benchmarks I pulled from different places and different tools that are largely pushing this stuff out. And they're starting to see this is the type of impact we're seeing across these different channels. And I think what's important, and even in the B2B space, is that we remember that people are still human, right? And so there's things that they still are used to interacting with that are not traditional channels that are used in B2B that could be, right? So when you think about push notification, you think about web messaging, you think about SMS, you think about ways that people, and social, right? These are all channels that people are still on. I still get on Facebook, I still get on Instagram, and I'm a consultant, right? So if I'm buying something and I don't see, retargeting of some kind in those different platforms, you're missing an opportunity, because that's where half my time on the internet is spent, is goofing around on these particular sites. Sadly, I should, learn more stuff, but that's what I'm doing half the time, right? And so if we're forgetting that, yeah, just because it's a B2B sale, that these are still people, if we're missing that, there's an opportunity there. And we can't afford to miss it, because you can see some of these numbers are pretty staggering, right? When you start to bring some of these things to market and start bringing some of these things together, you can see some real impact in people, because it's all about controlling some of their mind share. All right, so what's the answer? How do we approach solving customer science, right? This is more tactical things that we're actually doing in market with clients that I think can help solve problems for people. One, the first thing that we're largely doing, if you have this or don't have this, is we're focusing on creating an ideal client profile, right? And this takes a couple different forms depending on your go-to-market, right? So if you're more, call it account-centric, and you're thinking about realizing that your total addressable universe is much smaller, we have accounts that we're focused on, then this becomes more of an account-centric account valuation type of work versus a person level evaluation. And there are variations and flavors of this in the middle, and it really does kind of shift depending on what kind of business model you have. But largely the first thing is from a data perspective, quantitatively, what is the best customer profile? What do they look like? How do we understand the different behaviors and different demographic profile information or attributes that are most correlated with positive revenue outcomes? That's the quantitative side. The qualitative side of this is like, there's still the people side to every question, right? When you think about data, the data it tells a great story, but on the other side of it, especially in the B2B side, where there's more of like, it is a heavy sales component of it. We have to understand what's happening on that side of the story and really dig in and understand the qualitative side of that ideal customer profile. What does that largely look like? And there's a method to helping to gather all that information, quantify it together so that we can basically stack rank accounts and understanding this is what your best clients look like for these series of reasons. The same thing can be done on the B2C side, and it can gradiate away from kind of that true account structure to more of a person's scenario. So then you're looking at person segments, you're looking at large scale, and then breaking that down into segments and even personas. And you get to a point of, from a data perspective, when somebody comes in who's new, where do they fit in my audience model? How much information do I need to gather from them? How much information do I have right away? Do I ask it from the beginning? Do I append it through the process? But largely need to understand, this is how much information I need to immediately qualify them into some audience. And then based on additional behavior that I'm collecting and additional information points that I'm getting, how do I then continually in real time qualify them into potentially new audiences? That's the first thing. I think cross-sell, upsell, churn, these all kind of fit together in my opinion, right? So when you think about one, who are the people? Then it's a matter of like, what trajectory are they on? And this is, again, a little bit dependent on your business, right? So if the goal is to affect cross-sell, upsell, then it's a matter of leaning more towards, here's our best clients, here's the ones that are most likely to cross-sell, upsell based on that analysis work. Again, profile, what is the behavior journey or trajectory that they need to be on to fulfill that, right? What do they need to be doing? What kinds of questions and research do they need to be doing? What kind of conversations do we need to be having? What is the trajectory that they need to be on to get them to cross-sell? The same being true is if they're protecting against churn, which is a common thing as well. So when you think about ideal clients, the ones that don't churn, the opposite of that is like people who do churn, for instance, if you're in that kind of a model. So then it becomes a situation of what is an indicator of churn? What is the markers that exist that we can track and understand and recognize, man, this person fits the churn profile and they're headed down that path. That's something that we must know. So those are two things that we're doing from the audience side. Additionally, journey map is something that we're also doing. And this is really important across both B2C as well as B2B, because we need to understand not only, okay, who are they, but where are they on their journey? And this, again, is a data-centric approach. Like, we have to understand from a data mapping and an ability to track that information, we have to be able to say, all right, they're early stage, they're in audience A, they're early stage of their process, here's the behavior that we're seeing, and if we want them to track effectively from stage 1 to stage 2, here are the key things that we have seen historically need to take place. And as a marketing team, as a sales team, how do we ensure that those particular markers that we're driving towards take place? What are the channels do we need to use? What kind of tactics do we need to deploy? What needs to happen so that they display the behavior that gets them to track towards stage 2, right? So we need to be able to track that across the journey. We need to understand what it looks like. Here's just a big example of a journey map. It's huge and crazy to look at, but there's like a lot of things you can do with journey mapping if you get into it. The third piece that we're kind of bundling up in the audience research side, or the strategic customer science solution, is customer experience design. And it's what we can term as like basically an experience playbook. And we use the term playbook very purposely. If you think about sports, there's usually circumstances that exist within sports.
The team, go sports! That
largely dictate what play you should choose, right? So if you think about football, for instance, if you're in the middle of the field and it's third down and this is the score, what should you do? And that's what this is largely designed to help you learn, right? Help you kind of to design. So in circumstances, they're in audience A, they're in stage 2, they have yet to display the right type of markers that is a positive indication that they're going to move to stage 3. We're actually starting to see them wane in stage 2. What do we have to do there? based on ideal client profile, based on their journey, based on the information that we're tracking against them. We need to deploy these tactics. We need, in this particular case, is not exactly the right type of like example, but like we're going to send them an email. We're going to start retargeting them with these ads on these social channels. We're going to, if there's an app involved, we're going to push a notification to them. Maybe we're going to utilize text messaging because it's becoming more and more of a popular way to communicate with people because it's convenient and people's phone numbers are no longer changing anymore. So you get this like super awesome, a unique identifier that's naturally built into people's phone numbers because they don't change them. Had the same phone number for 15 years. So like thinking about what is the correct way to orchestrate that particular circumstance to surface up the type of environment that enables me as a buyer to make different choices and start to access information that would help me continue my thought process without being creepy, which is the problem, right? Like all of a sudden, like, you know, everybody has said something and then you start seeing an ad on Facebook for that thing that you were talking about. You're like, man, that is so creepy. What are they listening to and how often are they listening to it? And, you know, that stuff is kind of creepy and it's actually kind of a turnoff. So there's a balance between creating the right environment for someone to access the information that they want and start to develop these type of behavioral indicators and being like way too big brother and it's a huge turnoff. So this is where you get a little bit of art and science mixed into this, like smart marketing, knowing what's going to work, being in the right channels, being in the right structure helps to kind of like bring all that together. So those are really the customer science pieces, major pillars of things that we're largely putting into market for people and actually executing on that's helping them to start solve this problem. That's the first half of it. Well, let's go through the technology solutions just quickly, because I think this is a critical component of it. If you do the research, that's great. But if you don't have the technology side of this to actually make it real, then you're in that same kind of boat where you've got half the solution. So let's get through that a little bit more tactically. And then, yeah, let's talk about the things that we've actually done for clients and actually implemented and make real and see what kind of results we're getting. So the technology side, again, here's the challenge. You've got this kind of largely like layered type of technology approach. And usually you've got this situation where you're missing an orchestration layer, and sometimes you don't necessarily have a great analytics layer, and you literally have experience layer tools and data layer tools, right? So you've got all this data in different places and it's managed and it's stored and it's usually managed in a pipeline from IT and they've got it in this lake. And yes, you can get access to it sort of, but it's definitely not available in your experience layer tools in relatively real time. That's the challenge that you largely run across. Like, how do you get that data into a tool that actually allows you to create the experience? There's usually a gap there. So this is where you start thinking about how do you solve that and start thinking about the way that you kind of design your structure. And I think obviously, like, you know, we already kind of started to touch on this, but like, it's the idea of like, how do we think about technology as a cohesive unit, right? When you think about your experience layer set, which is a set of tools that's touching clients, that's actually interacting on the interface. You have the orchestration layer, which largely becomes what I consider like the heartbeat of all of this structure, right? If data is the lifeblood, the orchestration layer is the heart, right? And you have to be able to move data around this structure relatively fluidly in order for this to work, right? So your experience layer tools are developing and displaying and deploying their tactics. That information needs to be consumed by your orchestration layer, needs to be married together by the data that's coming in. That's not part of that orchestration. And I think there's some conversations around like whether all data lives in that orchestration layer or parts of that data live in that orchestration layer. And I think it's largely use case by use case. But you need to be able to bring all this data together. You need to be able to create a resolved identity in relationship to that data so that we know that Michael Davis in one platform is the same Michael Davis in another platform. And that's also part of the kind of fractured siloed data set or technology set that kind of causes a problem there. And you need to be able to bring that all together. You need to be able to represent it in a database, and you need to be able to see the analytics to make decisions, right? All of that data needs to be placed. You take a look at it, you can see it in real time, you can see what's actually taking place, what impact you're actually having, and make decisions about audience grouping in your orchestration tool, and largely be able to move that data relatively in real time back out to your experience layer tools. I think obviously we've already touched on this, like a customer data platform is probably the best way to do this, and at least I've seen. I think there's lots of options on how you can largely start to accommodate or kind of think about managing data. And if you talk to IT, they're going to say like an MDM is a better platform or DPM is a better platform. I think the biggest challenge you have with those solutions is, one, they're usually custom built, and anything that's custom built has its own inherent challenges. Two, they usually lack data resolution or identity resolution. Is the biggest thing that I see that you largely lack, right? And so when you say Michael Davis goes to your website and then he also interacts with some social post that you posted and then it took me to some page, like if they're not connected together by a tracking mechanism, like you can't see that that happened. And that's crippling from a marketing perspective, to really understand what took place, right? And so what companies are doing, and this is these tools are coming onto market, and we've got kind of a little bit of a rubric that we put together against the major tools that are on the market. Largely, they're solving that problem of being able to take all data tools, or call it data fingerprint, across your first-party ecosystem, so apps, websites, like largely like anything that you're putting out into market, take all of that information, bring it into one platform, resolve it against a single identity, and then marry it together with all of your third-party data, or what I would consider like offline data is probably a better way to say it, right? So all of the data that you're bringing in that helps to round out that profile can also be brought into your orchestration layer, and now you have a complete picture, truly a complete picture of the person and what they're doing. So this is one of the only ways that we've been able to practically solve this. Okay. When you think about like the actual space, the orchestration space, we've done a lot of work in CDP evaluation. We've largely, been engaged multiple times to build complete requirement sets, look at the different circumstances that exist, and then help to evaluate the tools that are on the market from a maturation perspective, as well as requirements fit. So this is an example of the tool set. This hasn't been weighted in any way based on requirements. It's just a vanilla straight across. Like these are probably the 5 tools that I consider to be like the leading tools in the space, right? Action IQ, Blueconic, mParticle, Segment, and Telium. I think there are use cases that make tools more or less a fit based on requirements, right? Like, what are you trying to do? What are the things that you have? What technology do you have? What's the most important component of this? How you're consuming data, how you want to activate on that data. All of those are dimensions that largely go into kind of deciding on the right tool set for a CDP. But I would say, like, with confidence, these are the top 5 that largely exist in the space. And this is how we're largely seeing the orchestration concept get solved. Is now you've got underlying data architecture, data in siloed places. You can grab that data and pull it in. You can take all of the web data, all of the digital interaction, this includes ad traffic and everything else, all of that also gets brought in. You have identity resolution that's taking place. You can build audiences in real time, basically saying like, okay, show me everybody that fits this profile. And as new data is created, you can actually shift people in and out of audiences in relatively real time. So I've qualified for audience A. Based on a set of changes that took place over the last 3 days, you went from A to B, and I pulled you out of the A tactics and put you into the B tactics. That can happen in real time. That's an evaluation. That's an activation question. When we think about looking at experience layer tools, this is it's not one that's a one size fits all, really. and the reason being is like everybody has different go-to-market needs. So major channels, things that they're really trying to activate within does depend on a lot of your audience work, right? And so, when you think about your audience research and you think about how audiences come together, like how you want to reach them will vary based on the audience, right? And so it isn't a way to say like, okay, go pick these tools and you're good to cover all solutions. I think what's important here is you think about what tools that are considered modern solutions, what are the things that they're able to do that, call it, legacy tools have not been able to do. And the first thing that I would say here is orchestrate a campaign in a real-time manner. That's probably the first thing that they need to be able to do. Can you take somebody that's been qualified to an audience? Can you orchestrate a series of cross-channel tactics that are based on information that's coming in real time? Can you do that in a single stream? That's one of the first things I look for when I look at these tools. There's a couple on the market that can do this. What comes to mind, like I've made a recommendation very recently for a tool called Braze, which largely does this really, really well. And they have the ability to activate email, push notifications, text messages, and push out to ad management tools all from the same kind of canvas. right? It's a campaign orchestration kind of tool. So when you think about those types of solutions, those are the types of solutions you think about. I think I'm more of a best in breed type of technology, proponent versus like suites. So I think there are some advantages to suite-based tools. So you think about the Adobe suite of products. They've got a ton of products. They're relatively under one roof, and there's some advantages to using a suite of products. I think there's also some disadvantages to using a suite of products. And if you guys have had any experience with Adobe or Salesforce or anything else, like they're largely acquired tools from other places that have been brought together under this roof. And sometimes it works well and sometimes it doesn't work so well. So my thought is like, what is the best tool that's available? Not necessarily what am I kind of contractually obligated to look at, or like, we're a Salesforce shop, so I got to buy everything from Salesforce. It's like, well, is that really the best tool for your circumstances? Maybe, maybe not. And so I think it's important as you think about these experience layer tools. One, you let your audience research dictate a lot of the channels that you need. If you see need for chat and web personalization to be a big part of your go-to-market strategy, then those are tools that you need to be looking at. I think web personalization, it doesn't get much better than Optimizely. When you start thinking about chat, there's a couple different ways that you can manage chat. If you think true just automated web chat and journey mapping is chat and nothing else, Drift is a really good option. If you think about messaging platforms, which I think is a little bit different, so you're talking about chat, you're talking about potential SMS being tied to this. And I think about messaging as depending on your audience, the ability to message outside of the traditional channels. So this is looking at like WhatsApp and WeChat and Facebook Messenger and Instagram Messenger and places where people are congregating. And depending on your audience and if it makes sense, like being able to facilitate conversations in those channels could be a big part of your go-to-market. So I think there's some desire and need to kind of decide and work through what that largely looks like. But those are the types of things that I'm leaning towards, so that when you get this all put together, you largely have something that looks like this, right? And so this is kind of the ideal state, right? You have your ability to pull data and aggregate data across all the tools that are on the left, right? So first-party data, cookie information, transaction information, mobile engagement, your data sources, their geolocation, all the different things that you largely could potentially track on somebody and help you understand what is that complete view of all of the activity, what is the digital fingerprint, so to speak, of somebody. What does that mean in relationship to audience building and journey mapping? How do they fit into the audiences that you've put together? How do you define those audiences that you put together? Where are they on the journey? And then can you use that information? Not necessarily, in some cases, you can get to visualization of that information. That's great, but then you can't do anything with it, which is pointless in general. Like you need to be able to take that information, understand it, visualize it, then you need to be able to activate on it. So this is the ability to orchestrate that data downstream to the other tools that are largely driving your go-to-market. So this is digital ads, emails, of course, anything on social, I think in-app experiences, this is chat, customer service, like a lot of tools. And this also includes your ability to kind of empower some real-time business analytics that may not necessarily be available based on your architecture. So I think this is the end state that we're all trying to drive towards as we try to solve this larger problem of basically people not wanting to talk to any of us. And how do we create a channel in which they're still having a self-directed experience that we have the ability to shape?